Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man! I shall first call in a moment Richard Benyon to move and then Kwasi Kwarteng to second the address. Mr. Richard Benyon.
I beg to move that an humble address be presented to Her Majesty as follows. Most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's most dutiful and loyal subjects, the Commons of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, in Parliament assembled, beg leave to offer our humble thanks to Your Majesty for the gracious speech which Your Majesty has addressed to both Houses of Parliament. It is an honour to have been asked to move the loyal address. But first, it's important we recognise that we meet in the shadow of some of the most terrible tragedies of modern times. Nothing, we say, can undo what has happened in North Kensington, or for that matter on the streets of London or Manchester. What we can in this House do is to join our Sovereign in leading the nation in mourning the dead, in caring for the injured and the bereaved, and uniting in an absolute determination to prevent any such tragedies and outrages happening again. Yeah. Our tone in this and future debates in the coming days and weeks must reflect the nation's horror and sadness at such awful tragedies. The country expects our debates and arguments to be robust, but there's room for consensus too. At times like this, we should reflect on Joe Cox's words about there being more that unites us than divides us. Mr. Speaker, I'm not the first Richard Benyon to have been asked to move the loyal address. My great-great-grandfather was the MP for Berkshire between 1860 and 1876. Though in many ways a great man, there is no record of him ever troubling Hansard with any speech, even a maiden speech. However, he was asked by Disraeli to move the loyal address in 1869, but replied that, though mindful of the honour, as a matter of principle, he never spoke in Parliament. As you know, Mr. Speaker, my father was one of your predecessors as member for Buckingham, and he told that story to Speaker Thomas, who clasped a hand to his head and said, "How I wish there were more like him in the House." Mr. Speaker, I still think of myself as young, but being asked to do this singular honour reminds me that I am, as golfers put it, on the back nine. In the election that we've all just endured or enjoyed, whatever your perspective, I faced a Labour candidate that was born a year after I was selected to fight the seat I now hold. Teams of therapists will be needed to help me overcome the brutal reality that I've gone straight from being young thruster to old codger with nothing in between. I wrestled the Newbury constituency from the Liberal Democrats at the third attempt. And in doing so, Mr. Speaker, I want to get it on the record that I reduced the numbers of members of this House who were educated at Eton by one. This may be the reason why some members opposite consider me something of a working-class hero. Newbury is a constituency that is no stranger to controversy. Greenham Common and the atomic weapons establishment at Aldermaston have made it a regular tourist destination for the Leader of the Opposition, among others. He will be pleased that one particular sword has been beaten into a ploughshare, which was the runway at the now decommissioned Greenham Common Air Base, which was taken up and crushed to form Newbury's new and infamous bypass. The only other member for Newbury to have moved the loyal address was William Mount, in 1905. A year later, he lost his seat due to a combination of negative campaigning by the Liberal candidate. I know that's hard to imagine. And crucially, because he was not a champion of free trade. The latter, a fact not lost on a champion of free trade, his great-grandson, David Cameron. Whilst the area I now represent is by all measure a prosperous area, someone once said to me that deprivation in West Berkshire was when Waitrose runs out of balsamic vinegar. Totally wrong, I should say. But we all, in all our constituencies, know areas of need. Not on the scale of deprivation and poverty that I witnessed in years as a soldier in Belfast in my early 20s, a memory that still has a great impact on my political beliefs today. In all constituencies, there are areas of humanity that have missed out on the prosperity of the fifth largest economy in the world. A rising tide of economic prosperity should lift all boats in the harbour, but that's not happening everywhere. And this Queen's speech has at its heart the words of the Prime Minister on the steps of Number 10 a year ago when she spoke of social justice and of equality of opportunity. The part of England that I represent combines so much of what makes me positive about Britain's future. Sitting alongside some of the most breathtaking countryside exists an economy of extraordinary excitement and dynamism. In 1985, a small group of people started working on mobile telecommunications in a one-room office above a curry restaurant in Newbury. That company, Vodafone, still based in Newbury, employs 108,000 people worldwide and is worth £59 billion. West Berkshire remains one of the most exciting places to start or to grow a business. It attracts companies and investment from around the world, and it's a model for the kind of outward-looking, engaged modern society that works for Britain today. But businesses are not just entities or institutions separate from real lives. They are first and foremost about the people who work in them and those families who in turn depend on them. And as we tackle the big challenge of this Parliament, let us remember what really matters to our constituents. Too often, this place and those that report on it are obsessed with the politics of Brexit. Our constituents are concerned with the realities of Brexit. This means the reality for companies in West Berkshire and in all our constituencies that are part of a new generation of creative entrepreneurs in manufacturing, in tech, in life sciences and the service sector. They need to be able to sell their goods and services and expertise in Europe and in the world. And they need to be able to recruit the best people to keep them competitive. Like the majority in my constituency, I voted to remain in the EU. But like the majority of people I represent, and most people in this House, I recognise the result of that referendum. I want to be positive about the future. I want to look back at this time and say I was part of a Parliament that rose to the challenge and with a great unity of purpose helped ensure that Britain successfully reset its relationship with its European neighbours, successfully negotiated access to key markets for its businesses, and whilst controlling immigration, still allowed people to come to Britain to study and to contribute to our economy and our society. The referendum was, in part, about parliamentary sovereignty. So we in Parliament can reflect that by immersing ourselves in the detail of what we can all agree is a great national endeavour. And let our eyes not only be on Europe. As the United States takes a particular route on the environment and climate change, we should grasp the opportunity to ensure the UK becomes the leader in clean tech, green innovation and resource efficiency. I welcome, for example, legislation in this speech that will promote the development of electric vehicles. This will ensure that we are building the cars of the future, maintaining our strength in motor manufacturing, whilst making our towns and cities better places in which to live and work. At times, Mr. Speaker, the problems we face seem massive, and there are times when we might let ourselves think that it's all too difficult. Just when all seems bleak, we as members of Parliament have a means of keeping ourselves grounded in the realities of life. In our constituencies, we can visit a charity, a school, or a business that inspires us. We can have a quiet conversation, as I had recently, with a veteran coping with life-changing injuries. These experiences lift our eyes to the extraordinary humanity and strength that exists in this country, never more so in this most sombre of times. It's the quiet but determined doers, whether individuals, whether in our public services, in industry, or in voluntary organisations, that we meet on an almost daily basis, that makes me optimistic for Britain's future. 27 years ago, John Major spoke of his desire to build a nation at ease with itself. It was a phrase that resonated with me. A nation at ease with itself would present its population with the same opportunities, whatever part of the country or whatever background they came from. Such a society would be one that was enjoying greater prosperity. It would be one where its citizens enjoyed longer and more satisfying lives. It would be one where inequality between the richest and the poorest was narrowing. By every independently produced statistic, we live at or at the threshold of such a time. Those measured indicators are steadily, if too slowly, being achieved. But none of us can claim that our United Kingdom is a nation at ease with itself. Last year's referendum and the recent election has shown that divisions remain wide and potentially harmful. The gracious speech holds firm to the Prime Minister's deeply held belief in having an economy and a society that works for everyone. These are values that matter to her, they matter to me, and I know that they actually matter to every single member of this House. Those we represent deserve to live in a country at ease with itself and with the world. I commend this motion to the House.
Before I proceed, I want to declare an interest. I have ransacked my family vaults. I have found no letter from Mr. Benjamin Disraeli to my great-grandfather or any other member of my family. Mr. Speaker, it is a great honour to be invited to second the humble address, which was proposed so eloquently by my honourable friend, the member for Newbury. He was both charming and funny, and that is a much rarer quality than you could expect, Mr. Speaker. It's wonderful to see everything in its place. We have you, Mr. Speaker. We have the government. We have a government. We have the leader of the opposition. In its place. All's well with the world. I'm even delighted to see our old friends, our special friends, the Liberal Democrats, in their place, albeit without a leader, but we can live with that for a while. Still brimming with enthusiasm. Election day, as we all know, was full of surprises. When the exit poll was revealed, there were gasps of anguish, despair, and deep, bitter disappointment. And that was only the members of the Parliamentary Labour Party. We all know how hard the business, we all know how hard the business of putting together a government has been. We know how tortuous the process has been, the debates, the tensions, the difficulties, and we were able to follow every detail closely in the highly objective, scrupulously fair pages of the Evening Standard. It is a great privilege for me. It is a great privilege for me, the son of Ghanaian immigrants who came to this country in the 1960s, to perform this duty today. My mother lived in Liverpool, where her elder brother was studying medicine. She remembers Sir Winston Churchill's funeral and Liverpool winning the FA Cup. She certainly would never have believed that her only son would become a British Member of Parliament. This is one of the strengths of this country. Now, I know people are wondering, the custom is for this speech to be delivered by a young, thrusting MP. After 7 years in this House, I was slightly confused about this description. One of my honourable friends, a former whip, said, "Oh, you're meant to be the young one, are you?" In my intake of 2010, I have seen such meteoric high flyers as a business secretary, a home secretary, and even a Lord Chancellor. And then there's me. May I reassure members, may I reassure the Prime Minister, I am still young, still thrusting. The occasion is also a great honour for my constituency Spelthorne. But as an MP, we can all reflect that politics is not all about set-piece occasions and big speeches. When first I walked down the high street in Ashford, I wondered how I would be treated. An elderly woman came up to me and said, rather surprisingly, "Mr. Kwarteng, I'm going to vote for you." Then I made the fatal mistake. I asked the question no candidate should ever ask. Why? "Oh, I don't know," she said. "I like seeing your smiley face in the newspaper." We must never attempt to second guess at every stage our voters' motivations. The borough I have the honour to represent has so many political and historic associations. Staines, of course, was where the barons assembled before forcing King John to sign the Magna Carta in Runnymede. It was in Staines that Sir Thomas More, one of your less fortunate predecessors, Mr. Speaker, was tried before his execution on Tower Hill. May you avert that fate. One of my recent predecessors, Sir Humphrey Atkins, was Chief Whip and then Northern Ireland Secretary in turbulent times. These days, my constituency is very much a place of business with a range of enterprises from small startups to global companies such as Shepperton Studios and BP. Spelthorne has a thriving business community, which is, of course, greatly helped by our location with excellent links to London and Heathrow Airport, I should suggest to you. To you, Mr. Speaker. There is also a great innovative spirit in my constituency, and with a study as recently as 2015 concluding that Staines-upon-Thames was the #1 town in the country to start a new business, with 3 times as many startups every year as the UK average. Despite changes in the way we do business and the technology that we use, Mr. Speaker, the traditions of this House have withstood the onslaught of time. You, Mr. Speaker, uphold the great traditions of this House and our parliamentary system. These institutions have evolved and remain. How can I put this? I was at a loss for words. I was thinking of a phrase. Of course, strong and stable. I'm delighted that the government's programme is ambitious. The government's programme is ambitious. We have Brexit. And when we look at the Great Repeal Bill, we have to consider what a great and significant piece of legislation it is. The original European Communities Act was passed in 1972. Feelings were so strong at that time that it took 300 hours of parliamentary debate before that bill was passed. Feelings are no less strong today because the future of the country is at stake. The complexities of the Great Repeal Bill will be debated extensively in the next 2 years. It will be a great landmark in the parliamentary and constitutional history of this country. A new immigration bill will seek rightly to reduce migration to sustainable levels, and once passed, both these acts will shape Britain very considerably in the years ahead. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the last few months have been, by any standards, horrific. I never thought I would live to see barriers erected on Westminster Bridge. The attacks on innocent people, even within the parliamentary estate, or most recently at the Finsbury Park Mosque, have rightly disgusted the overwhelming majority of decent people in this country. Neither did I think I would see a tower with 500 people sleeping in their homes go up in flames. The appalling scenes of devastation in West London last week can never be forgotten. We can talk of tradition, we can talk of history, but at a time like the present, we must be mindful of human suffering. It was at times like last week that we in this House are reminded of the solemn duties and grave responsibilities we have been called upon by our constituents and the whole country to discharge. The recent terrible events remind us of the awe-inspiring trust with which we've been endowed, and it is in this rather somber and reflective mood that I commend the gracious speech to the House.
Thank you. The question is that an humble address be presented to Her Majesty as follows. Most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's most dutiful and loyal subjects, the Commons of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in Parliament assembled, beg leave to offer our humble thanks to Your Majesty for the gracious speech which Your Majesty has addressed to both Houses of Parliament. I call the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By tradition, at the beginning of each parliamentary session, we commemorate the members we've lost in the last year. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, this year must also mark the passing of those we've lost in horrific events in recent days and weeks. The fire at Grenfell Tower in West London has killed at least 79 people. What makes it both a tragedy and an outrage is that every single one of those deaths could have been avoided. Something has gone horrifically wrong. The North Kensington community are demanding answers, and they're entitled to those answers. Thousands of people living in tower blocks around the country need urgent reassurance, and the emergency services, especially fire and rescue services in this case, deserve our deepest respect and support. I also want to pay a very warm tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Kensington, who in recent days has demonstrated so clearly why her local community put their faith in her, her determination to ensure that every family is rehoused locally is an exemplary work of a dedicated Member of Parliament, and I think we welcome her to this House. Lessons must be learned, Mr. Speaker, in the public inquiry, and a disaster that never should have happened must never happen again. The terrorist attacks in Manchester, London Bridge and Finsbury Park took innocent lives, causing dozens of injuries and traumatised hundreds of people, with willful and callous disregard for human life. The attack in the early hours of Monday morning in my own constituency is a reminder to us all that hate has no creed, that violence has no religion, and that we must stand up to hatred, whoever the target, and stand together against those who would drive us apart. And last night, hundreds of people assembled alongside Finsbury Park Mosque to give just that message from all communities and all faiths. Our communities and our country are strongest when we're united. As our late colleague Joe Cox said, we have far more in common than that which divides us. It's just over a year ago that Joe was taken from us by someone driven by hatred. Joe was driven by love and by an infectious energy. It was in the spirit of that energy and passion for people, life and justice that so many events were held in her memory around the country last weekend, including one in Muslim Welfare House in my constituency near the site of the vile attack that happened a day later. They held a great get-together at the weekend. We should remember her and thank her and make sure these great get-together events do continue year in, year out to unite our local communities. Earlier this year, Mr. Speaker, we also lost the father of the House, Sir Gerald Kaufman, who had served his constituents for nearly 47 years and previously worked for Harold Wilson in Downing Street. Gerald was an iconic and irascible figure in the Labour Party. He came from a proud Jewish background and campaigned to bring peace to the Middle East throughout his life. And it was my pleasure to travel with him in that quest to many countries in the region. And I loved the very many lengthy conversations we had with him. In fact, nobody ever had a short conversation with Sir Gerald. Both Gerald and Joe will be fondly remembered by all who knew them and worked with them. Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate the mover and seconder of the Queen's speech. First, I do congratulate the Honourable Member for Newbury on his speech. My mother told me of the joy of Greenham Common because she was there, and I went to visit her there, and I hope that he will understand the deep love of humanity that motivated all those women and others to go to Greenham Common during those days. And I would like to thank him for taking time out from his considerable responsibilities, looking after his extensive property portfolio and tending to his directorship of the UK Water Partnership. I hope one day a Labour government may soon be able to come to the aid of his Newbury constituents by taking water back into public ownership and to the aid of his tenants by ensuring there's a responsibility on landlords to ensure all homes are fit for human habitation. I know the Honourable Member will also continue diligently to pursue his other interests in Parliament, his interests in defence, in Africa and in rural affairs, and I do agree with part of what he said, where he spoke up of the need for us as a country to adhere to all the agreements on climate change issues all around the world, and I thank him for that part of his speech. I turn now to the seconder of today's loyal address, the Honourable Member for Spelthorne, whose speech was typically articulate and very erudite. After all, he is a former winner of University Challenge, so he would be able to do that. He mentioned Benjamin Disraeli, and I welcome that because Benjamin Disraeli once said, "If I want to read a book, I write one." Well, Mr. Speaker, it seems the honourable gentleman has taken the maxim to new levels, writing or co-writing 6 books during the 7 years he's been a member of this House. And I've been looking through the back catalogue of his books, and one book absolutely stands out. It's a must-read. It's absolutely apposite to our times. I hope it's reprinted. It came out in 2011, and the book said, "After the Coalition." Now, I don't want to cut across any of his present literary representations, but perhaps a sequel may be in the offing. Although I understand the latest coalition may already be in some chaos. And nothing could emphasise that chaos more than the Queen's speech we've just heard. A threadbare legislative programme from a government that's lost its majority and apparently run out of ideas altogether. This would be a thin legislative programme even if it was for 1 year. But for 2 years? 2 years? There's not enough in it to fill up 1 year. Mr. Speaker, it's therefore appropriate to start by welcoming what's not in the speech. Firstly, there's no mention of scrapping the winter fuel allowance for millions of pensioners through means testing. Can the Prime Minister assure us the Conservative plan has now been withdrawn? Mercifully, neither is there any mention of ditching the triple lock. Pensioners across Britain will also be grateful to know whether the Tory election commitment on that has also been binned. And older people and their families might also be keen for some clarity around the government's policy on social care. Whether it's still what was originally set out in the Conservative manifesto, or whether it's what was later amended to, or whether it is now something else entirely. And I'm sure it's just a matter of historical record, but in looking on the Conservative website today, the manifesto has been taken down in its entirety. It apparently no longer exists. The Prime Minister might also like to confirm that food is not, after all, going to be taken from the mouths of infants, and that younger primary school children will continue to receive universal free school meals. On the subject of schools, Mr. Speaker, there was nothing about grammar schools in the gracious speech. Does the Prime Minister now agree with her predecessor that it is delusional to think that a policy of expanding the number of grammar schools is either a good idea, a sellable idea, or even a right idea? Mr. Speaker, the good news may even extend to our furry friends. If the Prime Minister can guarantee the barbaric practice of fox hunting will remain banned in this country. Mr. Speaker, the government has recently embarked on what are likely to be very difficult negotiations concerning Brexit, which the whole House will want to scrutinise. Unfortunately, there have been some leaks, with the other side in the process expressing dismay at the weakness of the government's negotiating skills. But that's enough about coalitions of chaos with the Democratic Unionist Party. We must get on to the even more crucial issue of Brexit. Labour accepted from the beginning that the decision of the referendum has been taken. We are leaving the European Union. The question is how and on what terms. The government could have begun negotiations on a far better footing had ministers accepted the will of the House in July last year and granted full rights to European Union nationals living in this country. I hope now that the minority government will indeed listen to the wisdom of this House a bit more and work in partnership with our European neighbours. It is... of course.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. During the election campaign, he repeatedly refused to rule out a second referendum on our EU membership. Given that Brexit negotiations have now commenced, will he take this opportunity to rule out a second referendum now?
I'm not sure the honourable member was listening very carefully to any of my many speeches in the general election campaign. I made it clear we would negotiate sensibly and fairly with the European Union and bring the results of those negotiations back to this House. It's in all our interests we get a Brexit deal that puts jobs and the economy first. No deal is not better than a bad deal. It's a bad deal and not viable for this country. Yeah. We need full access to the single market and a customs arrangement that provide Britain, as the Brexit Secretary has pledged, and I quote, with the exact same benefits as now. Neither must arbitrary targets for immigration be prioritised over the jobs and living standards of the people of this country. Let's decide our immigration policy on the basis of the needs of our communities and our economy, not to the tune of dog whistle cynicism of Linton Crosby or the hate campaigns, or indeed, Mr. Speaker, the hate campaigns of some sections of our press whose idea of patriotism is to base themselves in an overseas tax haven.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. I would like to ask, can he confirm the contradiction in his own plans, that where he plans not to reduce immigration numbers, yet also stopping employers recruiting overseas? Is it not the right honourable gentleman that is a bit wobbly?
Mr. Speaker, we made it very clear throughout the election campaign and before that those employers that unscrupulously recruit low-paid workers from overseas, exploit them in this country and run away with the profits at the same time as creating community discord are wrong, are making money out of poverty and are grossly exploiting very vulnerable people on both sides of the channel.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. The Tory position on the single market and the customs union is clear. They were out of both. What is the Labour position on the single market and the customs union?
Again, Mr. Speaker, our position has been absolutely clear. Our position is we need tariff-free access to the European market to protect industries and jobs in this country. And let's have a little bit less from the other side of the dangerous threats of turning Britain itself into a tax haven, which would threaten jobs and public services here far more than in mainland Europe. We do not yet know the official title of the government's much-trumpeted Great Repeal Bill. But if we're talking about taking back control, then Parliament must be able to scrutinise legislation. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, the thin gruel of this gracious speech allows plenty of time for longer debates and greater scrutiny. That must include ensuring that the Human Rights Act and our commitment to the European Convention on Human Rights and the human rights of everyone in this country remain completely and totally intact, and we will ensure they do. It's our determination that by working with devolved administrations, responsibilities such as agriculture and fisheries will be devolved to those administrations and not hoarded in Whitehall. And on the subject of devolved administrations, may I also wish the Prime Minister every success in reconvening talks with all parties to restore the Stormont Assembly in Belfast as soon as possible. We also very much hope that any done deal with the DUP in this place respects the overriding priority of the Good Friday Agreement to maintain peace in Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, a state visit from the Spanish head of state was announced for July, but can the Prime Minister update the House on whether she can still expect the United States head of state to visit any time this year or any time in the future? Just a question. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, public service workers, such as fire service, police and NHS staff, receive huge praise when they respond to terrorist attacks and other major incidents. But it's not good enough to be grateful to our public service workers only at a moment of crisis and disaster. They deserve dignity, the dignity of fully funded services, the dignity of not seeing their jobs cut and living standards fall. There are now 20,000 fewer police officers than when the Conservatives came into office in 2010. And when the police, and Mr. Speaker, when the police raised this subject with the then Home Secretary, do you know what? She accused the police officers of crying wolf. I hope the current Prime Minister will correct the mistakes of the former Home Secretary. The gracious speech promises them all the powers they need, but what the police and security services deserve and the public demand is that they will have all the resources that they need.
Order. It is manifestly clear that at the moment the Leader of the Opposition is not giving way. Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because what was briefed to the media yesterday about scrapping the changes to the police funding formula is insufficient.
Yes, it is.
As they will only move funding between The member for Chester is very prescient and very forward-sighting. Thank you very much. As it will only move funding between rural and urban forces, when the real issue, Mr. Speaker, is the £2.3 billion cut that has been made in police budgets in the past 5 years. Mr. Speaker, our firefighters did an outstanding job at the Grenfell Tower fire, but those firefighters worked incredibly long shifts, in part because there are 600 fewer firefighters in London, 10 fewer fire stations in London, cuts and closures forced through by the previous Mayor of London. And talking to those firefighters, Mr. Speaker, exhausted from their work, who went into a burning building to save people, I said, why do you do it? Why do you go in when you know it's so difficult and so dangerous? They said, because we're firefighters, that's what we're trained to do, that's why we serve the public the way we do. We need more of them, there needs to be greater security for all of them in the future. We have to properly fund our fire services, not just at a time of crises. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the fact that there's a public inquiry going on into Grenfell, but can we take action now? And I pay tribute to those councils, including Croydon Council, for its commitment this week to install sprinklers in all tower blocks of 10 stories or more. But such minimal fire safety standards cannot be left to a postcode lottery. So will the government make available emergency funds for councils to both check cladding and to install sprinklers? The government should also have committed to a public safety bill to implement the recommendations of the 2013 inquiry into the fire at Lakanal House and reverse its guidance that removed the requirement to install sprinklers in new school buildings. It could still do so, and it would do so with our support, additional to any other recommendations that come from the Grenfell Tower inquiry. Yes, of course.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way and what he said about sprinkler systems for high-rise flats. We have 116 blocks of high-rise flats in my city of Leeds, 26 of which are in my constituency. At the moment, only 8, and those are the sheltered accommodations, will have sprinklers. It will cost £30 million for sprinklers in all of those flats. Would the right honourable gentleman join with me in urging the government to provide the money for all local authorities to put sprinklers into those high-rises?
I absolutely thank my friend for that intervention, and indeed during the discussion we held last week in Westminster Hall about this, her friend, the member for Leeds Central, raised a very similar point about the numbers of tower blocks. And I don't suppose too many members of this House live in tower blocks, but just think for a moment of the sense of fear that so many people had when they saw that Lakanal House fire. They're living on the 15th, 16th, 17th floor, knowing there's no fire ladder that can reach them, no helicopter that can land, and they're reliant on being able to get out or the fire to be contained. We need to give everyone that assurance, and local authorities that have seen massive cuts in their budget over the past years need the resources now to install the necessary sprinkler systems and fire prevention systems. And you cannot just use the excuse that the money isn't there. The money has got to be there to ensure we save life in the future. And we will support the government if it is able to bring that forward. Could I, well, for the last time I'll give way, then I must move on. Yes.
Go on, Andy. Could I, on behalf of my honourable friend for Kensington and Westminster North, as well as myself, thank him for visiting the area and also for making this an absolute priority. Right. Will he ensure that he and the government ensure that both the disaster relief in North Kensington and also pursuing this issue over the safety of people in tower blocks is made the absolute #1 priority?
That's right, Andy.
I thank my friend. Thank him for the support he's given to my friend the member for Kensington in the work that's been done there. Because what's happened in Grenfell Tower is terrifying for all those there. And I have to say, the problems that have ensued since then indicate just what happens when you cut local authorities' spending to the bone, and local authorities cannot cope as a result. We need properly funded, good quality public services in this country. The Prime Minister says that legal support will be made available to the families affected by the Grenfell Tower fire. But they should have had access to legal aid beforehand. And when they were raising their desperate concerns about fire safety, they were ignored, and again ignored by a Conservative-controlled local authority. The lessons of the failed austerity programme must urgently be learned. We cannot have council housing, social housing on the cheap, and we cannot have public services on the cheap. We have to invest in them. So will the Prime Minister now halt the cuts to the police, cuts that the former Met Commissioner this week called an absurdity? Those cuts have affected our prisons too, Mr. Speaker. Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons has expressed his concern at the lack of prisons and a courts reform bill, one that could have implemented our election manifesto to employ another 3,000 prison officers. Our children's schools are facing budget cuts. Can the Prime Minister confirm whether cuts per pupil funding are going ahead? And can she clarify to the House the status of the national funding formula? Head teachers and teachers are going through incredible stress with oversized classes and the difficulties of maintaining employment of teachers. The gracious speech mentioned legislation to protect victims of domestic violence. But does that also include restoring legal aid in such cases, or restoring the funding to reopen the many refuges that have been closed? We welcome reform of mental health legislation to give it greater priority. And we would welcome an assurance that no mental health trust will see its budget cut this year, like 40% of them did last year. Will she call on the public service pay? Will she call time on the public sector pay cap, which means our nurses are 14% worse off today than they were 7 years ago? As the Prime Minister is aware, some nurses and other public service workers have been forced to resort to using food banks, alongside over 1 million other people in this country. Rising inflation, the effects of low pay, falling real incomes are going to hit even more families. The 6 million workers earning less than the living wage, the millions of people in insecure work, those subject to benefits freeze, and the 5.5 million public servants. We owe them a lot better deal than they've been given by this government in the past 7 years. My party, Labour, won almost 13 million votes at the election, Mr. Speaker. And that was because, Mr. Speaker, we offered hope and opportunity for all and a real change to our country. The Prime Minister began the election campaign. She began the election campaign saying, if I lose just 6 seats, I will lose this election. When it came to it, she lost more than 4 times that many seats to Labour alone. From Cardiff to Canterbury, from Stockton to Kensington, people chose hope over fear. And they sent an unequivocal message, Mr. Speaker, that austerity must be brought to an end. 7 years of Conservative rule has left wages falling, inflation rising, the pound falling, personal debt rising, and the economy slowing. By no stretch of the imagination could any of that be described as strong or stable. I've given way to 3 members on that side and 3 members on this side, so I will conclude my speech. Thank you. If you want to boost pay, the most effective means is through strong and independent trade unions. Workers collectively defending and improving their pay and conditions. So we would repeal the Trade Union Act and strengthen collective bargaining. Across Britain, people have shown they believe there is a better way. In recent years, this government has thrown away tens of billions of pounds in tax giveaways to the very richest and to big business. And at the very same time, closing Sure Start centres, closing libraries, tipping social care into crisis and our National Health Service into record deficit. Under Conservative rule, school budgets have been cut, college courses closed, students being saddled with a lifetime of debt, and per-patient funding in the NHS set to fall for the first time in history. Our manifesto, for the many, not the few, and its popular policies, set out a very different path which caught the imagination of millions. A way for the public really to take back control, so that our key utilities and our railways are taken into public ownership and run in the interests of the many, not to pay the dividends of the few. We would end austerity, Mr. Speaker, by making very different choices, by asking the highest 5% of earners to pay a little bit more, while still keeping the top 10 percentage points lower than it was for most of Margaret Thatcher's time in office, by asking big business to pay a little more in tax, while still retaining a lower corporation tax rate than any other G7 country. Austerity and inequality are choices. They're not necessities. They are not unfortunate outcomes. They are a choice. They are a choice to make life worse for the many, to maintain the privilege of a few. If this government rejects austerity, challenges inequality, invests to expand and rebalance our economy, then it would have our support. But it continues down this path of deliberately making people worse off, of deepening division, and of neglecting communities that deserve support and respect. Then we will oppose them every step of the way if they continue with that. Mr. Speaker, this is a government I will continue with my speech. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a government without a majority, without a mandate, without a serious legislative programme, led by a Prime Minister who's lost her political authority and is struggling even today to stitch together a deal to stay in office.
Miller, I hope it is a point of order. To prejudge it. Let's hear the attempted point of order. Point of order, Mrs. Maria Miller.
Mr. Speaker, I'm simply seeking your advice, as somebody who's been in this House for 12 years, that members on this side can be somewhat disappointed that the Leader of the Opposition is not in a position to be able to answer our questions. Perhaps he can advise on what the usual format is in these cases.
All I will say to the Right Honourable Lady is this. I'm much touched by her faith in my abilities or her assessment of the extent of my powers. Disappointment may be very regrettable, but it is not a matter for the chair. Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Speaker, I am deeply sorry that the member...
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to that point of order, the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, said about 10 minutes ago in conclusion, I fear as time has passed, he may be in danger of inadvertently having misled the House. And I thought you might want to take the opportunity to set this right.
Now, some people may think that the Honourable Gentleman is fastidious and others may conclude that he's pedantic. You pay your money and you take your choice. But there is no disorder here, although if people persist in raising what they know not to be points of order, that would itself be disorderly. And I know that the Honourable Gentleman of all people wouldn't want to stray into such misdemeanour. Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, Just for the record, I've given way 6 times in this debate, and there's 6 days of debate, so we'll have plenty of time to make your points during the debate. But, Mr. Speaker, we will use every opportunity to vote down government policies that have failed to win public support. We will use every opportunity to win support for our programme. Labour is not merely an opposition, Mr. Speaker. We are a government in waiting with a policy programme. Mr. Speaker, with a policy programme that enthused and engaged millions of people in this election, many for the first time ever in their political lives. We are ready to offer real, strong and stable leadership in the interests of the many, not the few. We will test this government's Brexit strategy and what legislation comes forward against that standard. Mr. Speaker, this election engaged more people than for a generation, a tribute to our democracy. In the election, Labour set out a vision of what this country could be. What it could be. It could be more equal. It could be more prosperous. It could have opportunities for all. That is what we on this side will be putting forward in this Parliament, what we'll be fighting for in this Parliament, what we'll be demanding in this Parliament. The people of this country deserve something better than this thin piece of very little when they have so many problems they want and demand answers to from this Parliament. We will engage fully and make that case out for a prosperous, more stable, more cohesive society in Britain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I am sure the whole House will want to join me in sending our very best wishes to His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, following the news that he has been admitted to hospital. Our thoughts are with Her Majesty the Queen and the whole royal family, and we wish him a full and speedy recovery. Mr. Speaker, let me also join the Leader of the Opposition in condemning the appalling terrorist attack in his constituency earlier this week. And let me pay tribute to the work that he did through the night with his constituents on Sunday. I know the thoughts and prayers of the whole House are with the family and friends of the victim who died and all those who were injured. And I'm sure the whole House will want to pay tribute to the police and the emergency services for once again responding with extraordinary professionalism and courage that makes our whole country so proud of them. This was the 4th terrorist attack on our country in 3 months, following the attacks here in Westminster, in Manchester and at London Bridge. This time it was an attack on British Muslims as they left their place of worship at a sacred time of year. It was a brutal and sickening reminder that terrorism, extremism and hatred can take many forms, and that our determination to tackle them must be the same whoever is responsible. And this Queen's speech takes important steps in helping us to do so. We will review our counter-terrorism strategy to ensure the police and security services have all the powers they need, and that the length of custodial sentences for terrorism-related offences are sufficient to keep people safe. We will work to reach international agreements that regulate cyberspace to prevent the spread of extremism and terrorist planning, and encourage tech companies to do more to remove harmful content from their networks. And we will establish a new Commission for Countering Extremism as a statutory body to help fight hatred and extremism in the same way as we have fought racism, because this extremism is every bit as insidious and destructive to our values, and we will stop at nothing to defeat it. And, Mr. Speaker, I hope that whatever our disagreements, we can all at least welcome the focus in this Queen's speech on stamping out extremist and hateful ideology of any kind, including Islamophobia. For like all terrorism in whatever form, Monday's attack sought to drive us apart and to break the precious bonds of solidarity and citizenship that we share in this country. And our response must be to stand together more strongly than ever, to show that, in just one moment, to show that hatred and evil of this kind will never succeed, and that our values and our way of life will always prevail. I give way to the right honourable gentleman.
Mr. Forgiving Way, I think the whole House would agree with what she said. Does she agree with me that we need to work with communities and engage with communities? That is, all communities. They should play a leadership role in ensuring that we reject once and for all terrorism.
The right honourable gentleman is absolutely right, and I was struck when I visited Finsbury Park on Monday to see the way in which the interfaith, various faith communities there were coming together. I saw representatives from the Muslim faith, from the Jewish community, from the Christian community, all coming together with one ambition, which is to drive extremism and hatred out of our society.
I'm very grateful, Prime Minister, for giving way. This is the first time we come together after Manchester, London Bridge and, of course, Finsbury Park. Countering extremism and terrorism of all kinds must be a priority for this government. Would she join me in calling on all members of this House to give our security agencies the tools they've asked for in this gracious speech so they can do their job properly?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the intervention that he has made, and I would hope, given that I believe there is a desire across this whole House for us to deal with terrorism and drive out terrorism and extremism of all kinds, that all members of this House will feel able to support the government in measures that we bring forward to do just that.
For giving way. When she was Home Secretary, she took a decision to weaken the surveillance powers of the police and intelligence services by abolishing control orders.
Exactly.
Will she now accept that that decision was a mistake? Will she review it, and will she strengthen the powers of the police and intelligence services in the very difficult task that they have to do of monitoring suspects who may have the intent of doing harm but who have not yet committed a crime?
The right honourable gentleman refers to control orders. Of course, what was happening with the control orders that a previous Labour government had introduced was that they were increasingly being knocked down in the courts. We introduced the terrorism prevention and investigation measures. We have subsequently enhanced those measures. We have also ensured, through the Investigatory Powers Act, which we introduced when I was Home Secretary, that our police and our intelligence and security agencies have powers they need. What we have seen now is an increase in the tempo of attack planning. And remember, we have seen these terrible terrorist attacks that have taken place. Over the same time period, 5 other plots have been foiled by our police and security services. This shows the increasing scale and tempo, and it's in that context that we need to look at the powers for the future to ensure that our security services and our police have the powers they need. And I look forward to the right honourable gentleman joining us in ensuring that we give those powers to our agencies. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to say a few words about the disaster at Grenfell Tower. I will give way to the...
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. The Prime Minister will be aware that across the country concerns have been raised about the cuts to policing in the last Parliament and the impact that that has also had on the connection between police and our communities. Will she now today also confirm that she will look to reverse those cuts to make sure that we have that connection at a time when there are greater demands on police time and that we need to have much greater reassurance and connection back with our communities?
As I'm sure the Honourable Lady is aware, we have protected counter-terrorism policing. We're providing funding for an uplift in armed policing, but we are also protecting police budgets, which of course is different to the view that was put forward by the former Shadow Home Secretary, now the Mayor of Manchester, who said the police could take 10% cuts in their budget. We didn't listen to that. We protected them. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to say a few words about the disaster at Grenfell Tower. The whole country was heartbroken by the horrific loss of life and the utter devastation that we have seen. I'm sure the whole House will join me in sending our deepest condolences to the friends and families of all those who lost loved ones. And today we also think of those who survived but lost everything. One lady I had met ran from the fire wearing no more than a T-shirt and a pair of knickers. She had lost absolutely everything. So let me be absolutely clear. The support on the ground for families in the initial hours was not good enough. People were left without belongings, without roofs over their heads, without even basic information about what had happened, what they should do, and where they could seek help. That was a failure of the state, local and national, to help people when they needed it most. As Prime Minister, I apologise for that failure. And as Prime Minister, I've taken responsibility for doing what we can to put things right. That is why each family whose home was destroyed is receiving a down payment from the emergency fund so they can buy food, clothes and other essentials. And all those who have lost their homes will be rehoused within 3 weeks. There will also be an independent public inquiry chaired by a judge to get to the truth about what happened and who was responsible, and provide justice for the victims and their families who suffered so terribly. All those with an interest, including survivors and victims' families, will be consulted about the terms of reference, and those affected will have their legal costs paid. And because it is clear that the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea haven't been able to cope with the scale of the tragedy, we will also develop a new strategy for resilience in major disasters, which could include a new civil disaster response task force that can help at times of emergency. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we must learn some of the lessons of this and previous disasters where bereaved families have not had the support they need. I will give way to
An estimated 8% of London's population live in tower blocks, and the same point has been made in respect of other cities. Inner London authorities such as Westminster have lost 45% of their funding in recent years. That includes responsibilities for environmental health. In Kensington, the figure is 38%. Will she today guarantee local authorities will be fully funded for an urgent review of tower block safety and all remedial action that is necessary, including the installation of sprinklers where appropriate, so they can proceed in a matter of days with that comfort? And will she agree also that regulation is a necessary element of a safe society, not a burden, and she will legislate swiftly when necessary to ensure all high-rise residents are safe?
We all, across this whole House, we all share a desire to ensure that people are safe and can have the confidence of being safe in their homes. The work is being going. The work started immediately by the Department for Communities of Local Government, encouraging local authorities, and they have been working with the fire service to look at the issues in their tower blocks and to assess those tower blocks. We do not yet know the absolute cause of the fire in Grenfell Tower. That work is ongoing. We will take what action is necessary coming out of that, including learning the lessons that come out of it. She speaks about the issue of, the Honourable Lady speaks about the issue of regulation. Of course, there is rigorous fire regulation in place. If there are requirements to change that come out of the investigation that is currently taking place, then of course we will act, and we will do so swiftly. And just, Mr. Speaker, so honourable and right honourable members of this House are aware, there are of course a number of investigations. The police have opened a criminal investigation. The fire service and the building research establishment are investigating as quickly as possible the exact cause of the fire, so that any action that is required as a result of that can be taken. And of course there is the public inquiry that I've also announced. And finally, as I said, Mr. Speaker, we must learn some of the lessons of this and previous disasters where bereaved families have not had the support they need. So we will also introduce an independent public advocate for public disasters, a strong independent voice for victims, acting on behalf of bereaved families and supporting them at public inquests and inquiries. Mr. Speaker, let me join the Leader of the Opposition in paying tribute to the 2 members of Parliament that we lost in the course of the last year. Gerald Kaufman was an outstanding parliamentarian who served this House and his constituents in Manchester for an incredible 46 years. We didn't agree on everything, but as Father of the House, he was an invaluable source of wisdom and experience for members on all sides, and he will be greatly missed. And the despicable murder of Joe Cox shocked and devastated this House and this country. Joe was an inspirational MP, a campaigner and a humanitarian whose mission in life was defined by hope and love. Her killer sought instead to spread hate and division. But last weekend, as part of the great get-together, I and many hundreds of thousands of others, I'm sure, members of this House, in her honour, came together, stood together, pulled together all across the country to unite against that hatred and to prove, in Joe's own words, that we have far more in common than that which divides us. And I'm sure that the whole House will join me in paying tribute also to Joe's husband, Brendan, for the extraordinary courage and strength that he has shown in dealing with such personal tragedy and for honouring Joe's memory in such an inspiring way. Whatever our disagreements in this House, may we all honour Joe's memory and show that in our United Kingdom, hope will always triumph over hate. Mr. Speaker, the House will know that the first part of a successful Queen's speech is finding someone to propose it. And it is, of course, intended to be a witty speech, as indeed the speech from my right honourable friend, the member for Newbury, was today. From my point of view, a little too witty, because he took all the jokes that I had written in my speech. But I have to say that my... Wait for it. My right honourable friend, over the years that he has been the member for Newbury and in the years when he was fighting to take the seat, has shown a great commitment to his constituents, but also to the important task of government of building a stronger economy and a fairer society. And I know, for example, as a fellow Berkshire MP, the work he has done to raise awareness of an issue that I'm particularly concerned about, namely the issue of mental health. He's also made a significant contribution during his time as a minister. I understand that once as Fisheries Minister, he mixed up his cod and his skate. But I'm sure that, like the rest of us, he won't fail to welcome the absence in this House today of salmon. My right honourable friend,
I wonder if the Prime Minister's reason for not welcoming the former honourable member is that he scares her. Yep.
I have to say to the honourable lady, the reason I'm not welcoming the former honourable member to this House is because he was beaten by a Conservative in the election. My right honourable friend, the member for Newbury, showed great skill and tenacity over his 3 years of negotiations on the common fisheries policy. It started with the UK as a minority of one and ended with the EU unanimously supporting a reform agenda, the principles of which will be at the heart of the fisheries bill in this Queen's speech. He was also the minister who secured cross-party support for moving our canals and waterways from the public to the charitable sector, creating the Canal and River Trust, one of the biggest and best endowed charities in this country. He made an excellent speech today in the finest traditions of this House. And, Mr. Speaker, the Queen's speech was brilliantly seconded by my honourable friend, the member for Spelthorne. My honourable friend, the member for Spelthorne, is a distinguished political historian and a prolific writer, as the Leader of the Opposition pointed out. And my honourable friend, I understand, has a particular interest in female Prime Ministers. Indeed, members may know that his most recent book profiled the most testing 6 months for our country's first female Prime Minister. It ran to 272 pages. I fear his next book could be somewhat longer. My honourable friend is also widely regarded for his good looks. The Sunday Telegraph once described him... The Sunday Telegraph once described him as a Tory heartthrob, and during his time on University Challenge, I gather he even made it to page 3 of The Sun. Perhaps most significantly, my honourable friend is confounding the Daily Mail, who cited the 1995 University Challenge winning team, of which my honourable friend was a member, when arguing that all too often the brainy winners of the BBC's flagship programme sink without trace after their moment in the spotlight. I couldn't disagree more, and the House has today seen my honourable friend's talents on full display. A tremendous speech with flair, substance and wit. He brings an historian's wisdom to the challenges and opportunities which our country faces, and I've no doubt he'll make a major contribution in the years ahead. Mr. Speaker, let me welcome the honourable member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber as the new leader of the SNP here in Westminster. And I'm also, of course, particularly pleased to welcome to the Conservative benches my 13 Scottish Conservative colleagues. It's good that my right honourable friend, the Scottish Secretary, will not have to put up with any more jokes about pandas. Mr. Speaker, turnout at the election was higher than in 2015, including many more younger people. And while on this side of the House we would have preferred more of them to vote for us, more young people going to the ballot box is something we should all welcome. Let me also welcome the Right Honourable Member for Islington. Let me also welcome the Right Honourable Member for Islington North back to his place as the Leader of the Opposition. He fought a spirited campaign and he came a good second, which was both better than the pundits predicted and than many of his own MPs hoped for. I'll give it.
Grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way, or she's celebrating her immense triumph during the recent campaign. I couldn't help but notice as the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition went off to listen to the humble address, think back to when I was at school and I didn't see people for 6 weeks, and then they came back and you thought, has she shrunk or has he grown?
No, Mr. Speaker, I was hoping the Prime Minister might answer my honourable friend.
Order, we're going to hear from the honourable gentleman. No, I'm bottling him up. We're going to hear him. We're going to hear from him in a moment. But normally there is a response to an intervention before one has another intervention. The Prime Minister.
I was indicating the fact that I didn't think that intervention actually required or justified a response.
Procedural terms, I'm afraid it did, and it's now received a response. Mr. Christian Matheson.
As always, Mr. Speaker, I'm inclined to agree with you. And can I thank the Prime Minister for? Can I thank the Prime Minister for giving way? Can I thank her also for calling general election, which I increased my majority from 93 votes to 9,100. She talks about young people increasing their vote. In that case, why is she introducing voter suppression methods, such as enforcing people, obliging voters to show identification before they vote?
I'm sure anybody in this House who values democracy will also want to ensure that that democracy is fair and free of fraud. And it is in that spirit that we are introducing requirements for people to identify them. I think it's a perfectly reasonable requirement to ensure that people who are voting are those who are entitled to vote. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. If she values votes for young people and values democracy, I look forward to bringing forward votes for 16, 17-year-olds.
Well, that is an issue on which the honourable gentleman and I will continue to disagree. Mr. Speaker, the election also showed that as it faces the big challenges of our future, our country is divided, red versus blue, young versus old, Leave versus Remain. As I said here last week, the test for all of us is whether we choose to reflect divisions or help the country overcome them. With humility and resolve, this government will seek to do the latter. We will do what is in the national interest, and we will work with anyone in any party that is prepared to do the same.
I thank the Prime Minister's commitment to tackling social injustice. Could she perhaps say a little bit more about what we can do to stop people being discriminated on grounds of race as well?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising that. This will reflect the outcome of the very important racial disparity audit, which we introduced as soon as I became Prime Minister last year. I think it's important that we do test what is happening in relation to our public services. I was struck as Home Secretary by the examples I saw. I took action on Stop and Search. Never had been done by a Labour government, but I took action on Stop and Search because I thought it was important that nobody was stopped on the streets of our country because of the colour of their skin. There were other issues that we addressed in government previously. Our racial disparity audit will show us what is happening in our public services, and we'll be able to act on the back of that to ensure truly that the approach that we're taking is a fair one and that there is not that discrimination. I'm going to make a little progress before I give way again. Mr. Speaker, we will work every day to earn the trust and confidence of the British people, and we will make their priorities our priorities, dealing head-on with the major challenges our country faces, and that is what this Queen's speech is all about. I'm just going to make a little progress and then I will give way again. Mr. Speaker, this Queen's speech is about recognising and grasping the opportunities for every community in our country to benefit as we leave the European Union. It is about delivering the will of the British people with a Brexit deal that works for all parts of our United Kingdom and that commands the greatest possible public support. It's about building a new, deep and special partnership with our European friends and neighbours, because we're leaving the European Union, we are not leaving Europe. And it is about seizing this moment of national change to deliver a plan for a stronger, fairer Britain, by strengthening our economy, tackling injustice and promoting opportunity and aspiration for all. Because, as I've said many times before, the referendum vote was not just a vote to leave the European Union, it was a profound and justified expression that our country often does not work the way it should for millions of ordinary families. And this Queen's speech begins to change that by putting fairness at the heart of our agenda.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. She knows that I've been a long-standing campaign for improving mental health care in this country. And the truth is that there are many people across our country today not getting the care that they need, including many children who, in very traumatised states, are spending too long in queues to get the appropriate treatment. Can the Prime Minister tell us what she's going to do to convert warm words of the government on palliative esteem into actual action on mental health?
I commend my honourable friend, who has, as he said, while he has in this House and before, been a champion of this issue of mental health and has done important work on it. There are a number of strands to what the government wants to do. One of those is actually putting in place a new Mental Health Act, but we will, of course, consult widely on that new Mental Health Act. I also want to ensure that every school, every primary and secondary school, has a member of staff who is trained to identify mental health problems and knows how to deal with those issues. I was very struck when I met the charity Young Minds a few weeks ago at the issue of raising awareness of mental health problems, particularly among young people. The earlier we can address these issues, then the better we can deal with them and the better life we can ensure that the people with these mental health problems have. So those are some of the issues that we will be putting into place, but I look forward to working with my honourable friend on ensuring that what we're doing does indeed address the issues that we need to address. Well, I will give way to the honourable lady.
Grateful to her for giving way, and it's good to see her here actually facing the other parties. She has actually turned up, which is not always the case in the election campaign. But the gracious speech contained 8 Brexit bills, but not one single one of those bills covered the environment. Is her failure to propose a Brexit bill on the greatest challenge that we face because she simply doesn't care about the environment and climate change, or because she's been influenced by the DUP dinosaurs who sit beside her and who don't want to take that kind of leadership in the future?
No, I'm very conscious of the significant amount of legislation from Europe which affects environmental matters, and those issues are being...
Mr. Speaker, my party was elected by the people of Northern Ireland to represent the constituents who elected us here. Is it parliamentary for the Honourable Lady to describe us in the unparliamentary terms that she did, which I regret? She does not understand the policy that my party has on the environment. She should go and read our manifesto. But we have the right to speak for the people of Northern Ireland, and in this Parliament we will.
Order. Let me just say two things in response to the, I'm sure, sincere point of order from the right honourable gentleman. First of all, the use of the word in question is not unparliamentary. It's a matter of taste as to its desirability or otherwise. And secondly, and I know how robust a character the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman is, I would simply say that the word in question refers to a species that survived for many, many millions of years. The Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said, the Queen's speech is about putting fairness at the heart of our agenda. That's about building a stronger economy, delivering a modern industrial strategy so that all parts of our country and all parts of our society share in the benefits of economic growth, investing in the world-leading infrastructure that can unlock growth in our economy and improve the quality of people's lives across the whole country, and building a fairer society, increasing the national living wage so that people who are on the lowest pay see their wages go up as the economy strengthens, and also ensuring that every child has access to a good school place, creating a world-class system. I'm going to make a little more progress before I give way again. Creating a world-class system of technical education so that all young people have the vital skills they need to do the jobs of the future. Acting to make markets fairer by tackling unfair practices wherever they are found.
I am very grateful to her giving way. The Prime Minister mentions opportunity. Does she agree that one of the opportunities we must deliver is to allow more young people to get on the housing ladder? And will she reinforce her previous commitment to increase house building to 250,000 homes a year, which is a much bolder and a much more ambitious commitment than the party opposite?
I have to say to my honourable friend, he is incredibly prescient, because the very next sentence that I was going to say in my speech is tackling the housing crisis that locks so many young people out of the housing market. We do indeed recognise the significance of the housing problem in this country. That is about building more houses. It's also about keeping schemes going which help people to get on the housing ladder, and seeing a greater diversity in the housing market, rent to buy, shared ownership, a whole variety of opportunities for young people. And also, we will be tackling discrimination on the basis of mental health, sexuality, faith, disability, gender or race. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful. But how is the interim Prime Minister going to convince the country that she can negotiate a successful Brexit within the time limit with 27 other EU countries, when she hasn't been able even to negotiate a deal with 10 Democratic Unionist members of this House in the time limit before the Queen's speech?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for giving me the opportunity to welcome the work that the right honourable member, my DEXU Secretary of State for Exiting the European Union, has undertaken in relation to preparing our negotiations and starting those formal negotiations on Monday of this week. And I will be in the Brussels for the EU Council later this week, taking that further forward. Mr. Speaker, building.
Extremely grateful to the Prime Minister. I'm also grateful that the Brexit talks have now started. As part of those talks, the ability for those people who've come from the other 27 countries to live and work in the UK, and for UK citizens living and working within the other 27 countries, is going to be vitally important. They will be waiting to learn of their future. Will she give a guarantee to this House that she will come to this House as quickly as possible, not waiting until the discussions have finished, in order to give them the assurance that they will be able to live and remain in the countries where they have decided to live and work?
Yeah. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. We have always said from the beginning of this that we want to address this issue at an early stage in the negotiations, and that is indeed the agreement that has been reached. This is one of the very first issues that will be addressed in the negotiations, and I will make every effort and will guarantee to my right honourable friend that I expect to be able to come to this House to show the opportunities that the United Kingdom will be setting out for those EU citizens who live here in the EU. We, of course, want to see UK citizens in the European Union being treated fairly as well, but we will soon be setting out our offer in relation to European Union citizens living here in the United Kingdom. I'll give way one more time.
Grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way. The fact is that the gracious speech has been given today, and the Prime Minister still can't tell us how a government will be composed or how it will be supported. And given that she asked for a very personal mandate during the general election campaign and didn't get one, the only question is why she's still here.
Let me just point out a few facts to the honourable gentleman. I mean, which party was it that got the highest percentage share of the vote? Labour or Conservative? Conservative. Which party was it? Which party was it that got more votes, 800,000 more votes than the other party? Labour or Conservative? Conservative. And which party was it that got 56 more seats than the Labour Party?
Order! I'm not going to... Order! Order! I will not have the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition or any member of this House shouted down. Order! Mr Campbell, I'm sure you mean... Order! Order, you're wittering away from a sedentary position to no obvious benefit or purpose. I'm sure you mean well. Order! I'm sure you mean well, but I don't require your assistance at this time. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was merely pointing out that the Conservative Party got 56 more seats than the Labour Party. We are doing what is in the national interest, which is forming a government to address the challenges that face this country at the moment. It is a critical time. It's important that we have a government committed to the national interest. I give way to my honourable friend. Yeah.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister just mentioned making markets work better and for everybody. She knows that the energy price cap had wide cross-party support from all sides of this House. So I was delighted to see energy price protection and pro-consumer switching and transparency measures in the Queen's speech. Can she confirm that those measures mean the price cap to deliver 17 million customers the £100 savings which we promised on our manifesto, rather than the narrower or more anti-competitive counter-proposals from the big six energy firms instead?
I can confirm to my honourable friend that we do indeed intend to take action on this issue. We recognise the problem that there is in relation to energy bills. We want to ensure that we get the best measure in place that is going to deliver what we all want, which is to see people no longer being ripped off by the high energy tariffs that they are given. So strengthening the... I'll give one.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. The Prime Minister has talked about the national interest and the need for cross-party support. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that in her excellent proposal to have a commission for tackling extremism, for that to work, it really does require the engagement, not just of members on this side, but of members on the other side of the House, if we are to stamp out the evil ideology of extremism that drives terrorism in this country?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We have spoken a lot about the need to deal with terrorism, and of course we do need to look at the powers we have to deal with the terrorists. But we also need to ensure that we are dealing with the extremism and hatred that fuel that terrorism. And that's why the Commission for Countering Extremism is so important. And I hope it is a measure, as I said earlier, that can be supported across all parts of this House, because it is important if we are going to ensure that we drive this extremism and hatred out of our society. I have already taken 3 times as many interventions as the Leader of the Opposition. So I will make some progress on my speech. Mr. Speaker, we also want to build a more secure United Kingdom, investing in our defence and national security and enhancing our leading role on the world stage. Strengthening the social, economic and cultural bonds between England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. Delivering on our commitment to devolution by working in cooperation with all the devolved administrations, and working with all the parties in Northern Ireland to support the return of devolved government. Building a country that is stronger, fairer, safer and more secure for all our children and grandchildren. A country that works for everyone. That is our ambition, and that is what this Queen's speech will help to deliver. The first part of this Queen's speech is, of course, about Brexit. A Brexit deal that works for every part of the country and commands the greatest possible public support. Over 80% of the electorate backed two major parties, both of whom campaigned on manifestos that said we should honour the democratic decision of the British people. So this government will respect the will of the British people and see Brexit through. We will seek to build a wide consensus as we do this and as we take bills through this House, which will include a trade bill, a repeal bill, an immigration bill, as have been referred to, and also bills to deal with control of access to our waters for fishermen and greater stability to farmers, with a new bill on agriculture. I will just make a little more progress and then I will take some more interventions. But if we're going to grasp the opportunities as we leave the European Union, we need to build a stronger economy. That's right. We've always understood, as Conservatives on this side of the House, that sound money and fiscal credibility is the foundation for everything else. That's why it was right to take the tough decisions we did after the financial crash. And it has paid off. The deficit is down by 3/4. Employment is up by 2.9 million. And because of policies like the national living wage and taking 4 million of the lowest paid out of income tax altogether, inequality has been reduced to its lowest level for 30 years. So in this Queen's speech, we will continue to improve the public finances and work towards getting our country back to living within its means. We will also invest in the world-leading digital infrastructure we need to benefit from the opportunities of new technology. And we will encourage businesses to grow and create jobs by continuing to cut corporation tax, because that's how you raise more money, not less.
I thank the Prime Minister. I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. Does the Prime Minister recognise that the economy is evolving and changing, and therefore can the Prime Minister confirm that the government is absolutely committed to securing the rights for people in the gig economy who are on different types of contracts than has been historically the case?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and we have asked Matthew Taylor to do a report on the changing workplace, the changing structure of employment that we see, particularly, obviously, as my honourable friend has referenced to the gig economy. And when that report is published, we will obviously look at the steps that the government needs to take to support people with their rights. But as I've said in the past few weeks, we will enhance workers' rights. We believe in protecting those rights and enhancing them. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. Will my right honourable friend ensure that, that legislation such as providing for next phases of the high-speed rail project and other infrastructure investment means that we can rebalance the economy to make sure that the whole country benefits from the economic progress to achieve the...
It's very good to see my honourable friend in his place and to have seen him out on the campaign trail during the general election campaign. And I can absolutely confirm that we will put the legislation through for the next stage of HS2, and we will also ensure that we are continuing to invest, as my right honourable friend the Chancellor set out in the autumn statement last year, in infrastructure projects around the country. Because what I want to see is a country that works for everyone in every part of the United Kingdom, and infrastructure is an important way of helping to deliver that. Mr. Speaker, I will give way to...
Go back to what she was saying about making Brexit work for the entire United Kingdom. Can't she tell the House if a legislative consent motion will be required in the Scottish Parliament for the Great Repeal Bill?
That is a matter which is currently being considered both here and in Scotland. There is a possibility that a legislative consent motion may be required in the Scottish Parliament, but that is a matter that is being considered currently between the Westminster and the Scottish Government. No, I'm not going to. Mr. Speaker, I'm conscious that I have taken a significant number of interventions, and I will make progress so that other members are able to rise to speak. One thing that we will not do, I've said that we will protect rights and protect people at work as we leave the European Union, and indeed as we see changes in the employment structure in our economy. What we won't do is follow the economic prescriptions of the party opposite, because there is absolutely nothing fair about punitive tax rises that lead to fewer jobs, lower wages and higher prices for ordinary working families. And there is nothing fair. There is nothing fair about racking up debts for our children and grandchildren to pay. The only government you can trust to build a stronger and fairer economy is a Conservative government. And, Mr. Speaker, I've mentioned a fairer society, and I want Britain to be a genuine great meritocracy, where everyone has a fair chance to go as far as their talent and hard work will take them. That is about ensuring everybody plays by the same rules. It's about ensuring every child has access to a good school place. It's about ensuring that that right technical education is there. And the measures in the Queen's speech will help to do that, but they will also deal with some of the injustices in our society. The draft domestic violence and abuse legislation to provide a statutory definition of this hideous crime and ensure robust protective orders are available and that victims get the justice they deserve. I will give way to my honourable friend, but I will just say this. This is a measure that I hope will be able to command support across the whole of this House. There are many in this House who have championed the cause of dealing with domestic violence for many years, and I hope they will be able to join us in supporting this legislation.
Morton.
Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister is very aware, victims of domestic violence are both the directive victims but also the oft-forgotten indirect victims, such as children. Can she reassure us that steps will be taken to support those indirect victims too?
Yes. My honourable friend makes a very fair point, and I think one of the problems over the years is that all too often people have looked at the immediate victim or survivor of domestic violence and forgotten, for example, that if there have been children involved in a house, that it's not just a question of whether they've not seen something happening. They know what's happening and they are affected by it. And we will be looking at that issue of children. I will give way one time more to the honourable gentleman.
Quite rightly, this House praised the Prime Minister for the Hillsborough inquiry. Today I met with the victims of contaminated blood. Will she take this opportunity now to have a full public inquiry to those affected and their families?
I note the point the honourable gentleman has made about contaminated blood, and I will speak to the Secretary of State for Health. I think this has already been looked at, and other ways of dealing with this issue have already been introduced and addressed. Mr. Speaker, we are building opportunity and aspiration. I want to say just one more. We will also deliver a more secure United Kingdom because of the choices we're making to prioritise our defence and national security. Our Armed Forces Bill will give those who put their lives on the line in the service of our country the proper respect they deserve, with more security in the way they live and work. Our commitment to renew Trident means this country maintains its continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent as the ultimate guarantee of our safety, and a Prime Minister who is prepared to use it. And we will continue to play a leading role in international efforts to tackle mass migration and climate change, to alleviate poverty and end modern slavery. We have always looked beyond Europe to the wider world, and we will continue to do so. I am actually able to say this is in conclusion. This has been a difficult time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this has been a difficult time for our country. I know there are many parents who worry about the kind of world their children are growing up in, and I recognise that and understand it. It's been an unsettling time which has tested the spirit of our country, but we are a resilient country. Our response to disaster and acts of terror which take the lives of innocent people must be this: compassion, unity, resolve. For we're a great nation and a great people. We have been through and survived the toughest of times before, and we thrived. Once again, we can and will grow stronger from the challenges we face today. The Queen's speech on its own will not solve every challenge our country faces. Not every problem can be solved by an Act of Parliament. But it is a step forward. It is a step forward to building a more compassionate, more united and more confident nation. That's what this government will aim to achieve. It's what this Queen's speech will deliver, and I commend the Queen's speech to the House.